The HOA spent $80,000 to pave my driveway while I was sleeping, thinking they'd stolen my land for 58 cars. But by 4:00 a.m., I invoked a legal disappearing act that didn't just tow those cars. It sent the entire HOA into a $1 million bankruptcy. My name is Mark, and I'm a man who values two things: my peace and my property lines. For 10 years, I've lived on a 12-acre sanctuary that sits like a thorn in the side of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association. They are a planned community, which is basically code for a group of people who pay $300 a month to have a woman named Linda tell them what color their curtains can be. I am not in their HOA, I never signed their papers, I never agreed to their rules. But I own the one thing they desperately need: a 300-foot strip of land that connects their overcrowded cul-de-sacs to the main county highway. To them, it's a shortcut. To me, it's my private driveway. For 3 years, Linda, the HOA president who carries a clipboard like it's a weapon of mass destruction, has been trying to annex my land. She's tried bullying, she's tried fake noise violation fines, and she's even tried to have the city seize it through eminent domain. Every single time, the judge threw her out because my deed is ironclad. It dates back to 1920. But Linda had a plan B. She realized that the neighborhood was suffocating. They had overdeveloped, houses were packed like sardines, and there was nowhere for guests to park. People were getting $500 tickets for parking on the grass. Linda's solution wasn't to build a parking lot on HOA land that would cost too much. Her solution was to steal mine through a legal trick called adverse possession. She figured if she improved my dirt road, if she paved it, maintained it, and let the public use it, she could argue in court that it was no longer private. She was gambling $80,000 of the community's emergency reserve fund on a lie. The when was calculated. She waited for the one weekend a year I take my boat out to the coast. The moment my truck cleared the neighborhood entrance, the signal was given. I wasn't even gone for 4 hours before the heavy machinery arrived. Graders, steamrollers, and hot asphalt trucks invaded my property. They worked under massive construction lights that could be seen from 3 miles away. They ripped up my gravel, leveled the ground, and poured high-grade industrial tarmac over 300 feet of my soil. By Saturday morning, the transformation was complete. It wasn't a driveway anymore. It was a premium guest parking zone. They painted 58 individual stalls in bright white paint. They hammered Oak Ridge HOA parking-only signs into my lawn. Linda even sent out a mass text to the entire neighborhood. Victory is ours. Free parking is now open on the North Access Road. By Saturday night, the road was full. 58 cars, BMWs, Teslas, family minivans, and classic restorations were parked bumper to bumper on my land. Linda was seen standing at the entrance with a glass of wine, literally toasted her conquest. She thought the sheer scale of the project would protect her. She thought that once the asphalt was down and the cars were there, I wouldn't dare touch it. She forgot one thing. I'm not just a landowner. I'm a guy who reads the fine print. And the fine print of the state vehicle code says that unauthorized paving on private land constitutes a felony trespass, and vehicles parked on unpermitted private lots are subject to immediate no-notice removal. I pulled into the neighborhood at midnight on Sunday. I didn't go to my house. I parked my truck across the entrance of the new road, blocking anyone from leaving. I stepped out, looked at the sea of 58 cars sitting on my property, and I didn't feel anger. I felt a cold, calculated satisfaction. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call the police. I didn't call Linda. I called a man named Big John, who owns the largest heavy-duty recovery fleet in the tri-state area. I told him, "John, remember that contract we discussed? The one for the mass trespass event? It's happening right now. I need every flatbed, every hook, and every wheel lift you have. And John, make sure your impound lot is locked tight, because tonight, 58 families are about to find out exactly where my property line starts." The how was about to begin, and it was going to be expensive. It was 12:15 a.m. when the first yellow strobe lights appeared at the edge of the highway. Big John didn't just bring a couple of trucks, he brought a literal army. He understood the assignment. In my state, if you park on clearly marked private property without a permit, the landowner has the right of immediate removal. Usually that's one car. Tonight, it was an entire parking lot. I met John at the entrance. I handed him the original notarized deed and a notice of non-consensual paving. I told him, every vehicle on this blacktop is trespassing. I want them moved to your most secure, most expensive impound lot. Do not drop them at the neighborhood entrance. Take them across the county line. John grinned. Mark, this is going to be the most profitable night in the history of my company. Boys, let's clear the deck. The operation was a masterpiece of mechanical efficiency. They didn't use sirens. They didn't use loud air brakes. They used sneak grabs, the kind of tow trucks that have a hydraulic arm that slides under the tires and lifts the car in seconds without the driver ever leaving the cab. The how was simple. We operated in waves. 4 trucks would enter, hook 4 cars, and vanish into the night. Then the next 4 would slide in. It was like a ghost was eating the HOA's precious parking lot, 1 car at a time. By 2:00 a.m., we had cleared 30 cars. The road was half empty. That's when the first Karen woke up. It was Mrs. Higgins from House 42. She apparently had a Ring camera that alerted her to motion. She came running out in her bathrobe, screaming at the top of her lungs. Stop! What are you doing? That's my husband's Mercedes. This is HOA parking. John didn't even look up from his controls. He just pointed at me. I stepped out of the shadows, holding a flashlight and a giant private property sign I had just finished bolting into the ground. Morning, Mrs. Higgins. Your husband's car isn't being stolen. It's being relocated for trespassing on my driveway. If you want it back, I suggest you call the impound number on the back of this sign. Oh, and tell Linda I said thanks for the free pavement. She was speechless. She tried to call the police, but I beat her to it. I had already called the local precinct and faxed them my deed and the impound authorization. When the officer arrived 10 minutes later, he took one look at my papers, looked at the steaming fresh asphalt, and turned to Mrs. Higgins. Ma'am, the officer said, stifling a laugh, the HOA paved a man's private driveway without his permission. Technically, the HOA is the one committing a crime here. This man has every right to clear his land. I suggest you go back inside and call your HOA President. That was the signal for the floodgates to open. Mrs. Higgins didn't just go inside. She hit the emergency button on the neighborhood's private Facebook group. By 3:00 a.m., the street was a circus. Dozens of residents in pajamas were running toward the road, desperate to save their cars. But John's crew was faster. They had doubled their speed. As soon as a resident reached for their door handle, the truck would already be pulling away with the car in the air. Linda finally arrived at 3:30 a.m. She looked like she had aged 10 years in 2 hours. She saw her $80,000 masterpiece being stripped bare. She saw her neighbors, the people who voted her into power, screaming at her, demanding to know where their cars were. She ran up to me, her face a shade of purple I didn't think was biologically possible. Mark, you stop this right now. We spent the community's entire reserve fund on this road. You can't just tow these people. We have a legal claim. I leaned against my truck and took a slow sip of coffee from my thermos. Linda, you don't have a claim. You have a lawsuit. You trespassed, you damaged my soil, and you illegally parked 58 vehicles on a private residence. Every second those trucks are moving, the bill for your HOA is going up. Big John charges a $400 after-hours hook fee per car. 58 times 400. Well, you do the math. Her eyes went wide. She realized in that moment that she hadn't just lost the land. She had bankrupted the HOA. By 4:00 a.m., the last car, a beat-up minivan belonging to the HOA treasurer, was hooked and hauled away. The 300-foot strip of land was silent. It was a beautiful, pristine black asphalt road, and it was completely empty. But the disappearing act wasn't over. Because now that the cars were gone, I was about to show Linda exactly what happens when you improve my land without an invitation. By 5:00 a.m., the adrenaline in the neighborhood had shifted from panic to a cold, sinking realization. 58 families were stranded. No cars for work, no cars for school drop-offs, and no idea where their vehicles had been taken. Linda was sitting on the curb of the sidewalk, her head in her hands, watching her $80,000 investment sit empty. But I wasn't finished. You see, the HOA's biggest mistake wasn't just paving my road. It was giving me a high-speed, heavy-duty surface that could now support much heavier equipment. I had spent the last 2 hours on the phone with a local commercial fencing contractor and a concrete pouring crew. If Linda wanted to turn my driveway into a community asset, I was going to turn it into a fortress. "Right there, boys," I signaled to the driver of the first flatbed. The how of this phase was about permanent boundary enforcement. While the asphalt was still technically curing and settling, I had my crew drill 6-foot-deep holes at both ends of the 300-foot strip. We weren't just putting up a wooden fence that a disgruntled neighbor could kick down. We were installing industrial-grade, concrete-filled steel bollards connected by a heavy-gauge galvanized steel chain. Linda jumped up when she heard the jackhammers. She ran over, tripping over her own bathrobe. "Mark, stop! What are you doing? You're destroying the road. We paid for that asphalt." I didn't even look at her. I just pointed at the private property sign that was now backed up by a legal notice of permanent enclosure taped to the first bollard. "Linda, you didn't pay for a road. You paid for a gift. In this state, any unsolicited improvements made to private land by a trespassing party become the sole property of the landowner. You paved it, which means I now own a very expensive, very durable private runway. And since it's mine, I've decided to close it to the public, permanently." By 7:00 a.m., the transformation was complete. On both ends of the road, massive steel posts were cemented into the ground. A heavy chain was padlocked across the entrance with a sign that read, "Private driveway, all trespassers will be towed at owner's expense. No turnarounds." But the real nuclear option was the secondary blockade. I had 3 massive, 20-ton limestone boulders delivered and dropped right in the middle of the guest parking zone. These weren't just rocks, they were symbols. They ensured that even if someone cut the chain, they couldn't park more than 2 cars before hitting a mountain of solid stone. The atmosphere was toxic. The who had expanded from me versus Linda to the entire neighborhood vs. Linda. Every resident who had to pay Big John's $400 after-hours hook fee plus the $100 a day storage fee was now looking for someone to blame. And their eyes were locked on the woman who promised them free parking. One man, a guy named Dave who had lost his brand-new Ford Raptor to the impound lot, pushed his way to the front. "Linda, you told us this was legal. You said the HOA lawyers cleared this. My truck is in a lot 40 miles away, and they won't release it unless I pay $500 in cash. Who is paying for this?" Linda's voice was shaking. The HOA will reimburse everyone. We just need to. We need to file a claim." I couldn't help myself. I stepped up to the chain, leaning on one of the new steel posts. "Actually, Dave, you might want to check the HOA bylaws. Most associations aren't allowed to use emergency reserve funds for unauthorized construction on land they don't own. That $80,000 Linda spent, that was illegal. And if the HOA tries to pay your towing fees, that's misappropriation of funds. You guys aren't getting reimbursed. You're getting a special assessment tax to cover the legal fees I'm about to slap on this board." The silence that followed was deafening. The residents looked at the empty, perfectly paved road behind the chain, a road they could see, a road they could touch, but a road they could never, ever park on again. Linda looked at me, tears of pure rage and defeat in her eyes. "You ruined us, Mark. You ruined this whole community over a strip of dirt." I looked her dead in the eye and adjusted the private property sign. "No, Linda, I didn't do anything but defend my home. You're the one who spent $80,000 of your neighbor's money to give me a free driveway. I just made sure I was the only one who got to use it." As the sun rose higher, the disappearing act was complete. The cars were gone, the money was gone, and Linda's reputation was buried under 300 feet of my new asphalt. By Monday afternoon, the great paving miracle of Oak Ridge had turned into a legal nightmare that was about to swallow the entire community. You see, the why of this story isn't just about a road. It's about the massive financial liability that comes with arrogance. Linda had gambled $80,000 of neighbor-funded money on a crime, and now the bill was coming due. I didn't just stop at towing the cars and chaining the road. My cousin, the real estate litigator, stayed up all night drafting a multi-pronged lawsuit that made the HOA's previous fines look like pocket change. We hit them with 3 major charges: criminal trespass, permanent property damage, and clouding of title. The how of the bankruptcy started with the damage claim. Linda argued that because they improved my land with high-grade asphalt, they hadn't damaged it. My lawyer laughed in the deposition. Mr. Mark bought this land for its rural, undeveloped character, my lawyer explained to the shivering HOA board. By pouring industrial chemicals and petroleum-based tarmac over his natural soil without a permit, you have permanently altered the environmental state of his property. To return it to its original condition, which he has every right to demand, will cost an estimated $120,000 in excavation and hazardous waste disposal. But that was just the beginning. The real nuclear bomb was the special assessment. Because the HOA had spent their entire reserve fund on an illegal project, they had no money left for basic services. The neighborhood pool was shut down because they couldn't pay the chlorine bill. The landscaping crew stopped showing up because their checks bounced. The residents, the who in this phase of the story, were no longer just mad. They were out for blood. They realized that to pay for my lawsuit and to fix the budget hole Linda created, every single homeowner was going to be hit with a special assessment tax of $5,000 per household. I was standing on my porch when the first recall petition started circulating. I watched from my house as neighbors who used to wave at Linda were now screaming at her through her front windows. She had promised them a free parking paradise. Instead, she had given them a $5,000 debt and a car that was still sitting in a locked impound lot across the county line. Then came the why they couldn't fight back. During the discovery phase of the lawsuit, we found out that Linda had bypassed the HOA's own bylaws to hire the paving contractor. She hadn't put it to a vote. She hadn't consulted the community lawyer. She had signed the contract herself, claiming it was an emergency repair. Because she lied, the HOA's insurance company refused to cover the claim. They called it willful malfeasance. In plain English, the insurance company told the HOA, "You broke the law on purpose, so you're on your own." The board resigned en masse that Thursday. The HOA was effectively bankrupt. They had no reserves, no insurance coverage, and a pending 6-figure judgment from me. I remember the final meeting before the HOA went into receivership. I walked into the community center, the only person there not wearing a look of pure misery. I sat in the back, leaning against the wall, as the temporary board president explained that they might have to sell the community playground just to settle my legal claims. Linda was there, sitting in the front row, no longer wearing her president blazer. She looked small, she looked defeated. She turned around and saw me, and for a second the old Karen spark returned to her eyes. "Are you happy now, Mark? You destroyed this neighborhood over a 300-foot driveway." I stood up, tucked my hands into my pockets, and walked toward the exit. I stopped at her row and whispered loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I didn't destroy the neighborhood, Linda. I just reminded you that my property line isn't a suggestion. You spent $80,000 to give me a paved road, and now you're paying me another $100,000 for the privilege of letting me keep it. Next time, just stay on your side of the dirt." As I walked out, I could hear the shouting start again. The HOA was dead, the road was mine, and the cars were still missing. But the most satisfying part, my private property signs were now lit by expensive HOA-funded solar lights that they had installed during their overnight Blitz. They were literally paying the electricity bill to help me keep them out. By the time the dust settled on the HOA's bankruptcy, the why of this entire war had shifted. It wasn't just about a driveway anymore. It was about a permanent, undeniable statement of ownership. Linda and her board had spent $80,000 of their neighbors' hard-earned money to give me a gift I never asked for. So I decided to accept that gift. And then I decided to wrap it in a layer of absolute high-tech security that the neighborhood would have to look at every single day for the rest of their lives. The how of my final revenge began with the property deed I held in the thumbnail of this story. Because the HOA had officially defaulted on the lawsuit, the court granted me a permanent injunction and quiet title. This meant the government officially wiped any shadow of a doubt. That 300-foot strip was mine, the asphalt was mine, and the HOA was legally barred from ever stepping foot on it again. "Lower it down easy," I told the crane operator. I didn't just put up a chain this time. I used the settlement money, the cash I got from the HOA's remaining liquid assets, to build a fortress. I installed a commercial-grade sliding gate with a keypad that only one person had the code to, me. Then I did something that truly broke Linda's spirit. Since the HOA had already generously provided the smooth surface and the lighting, I converted the 58 parking stalls into something else. I didn't need 58 cars. I needed a hobby. I turned the middle section of the road into a private, professional-grade outdoor basketball court and a specialized test track for my remote-controlled car collection. I was out there on a Saturday morning, the sun reflecting off the pristine blacktop, racing a high-speed RC truck down the very lane where Dave's Ford Raptor had been towed just weeks before. I could see the neighbors watching from behind their fences. They weren't just mad anymore. They were mesmerized by the sheer audacity of it. Linda's house was the closest. She had to pull out of her driveway every morning and look directly at my gate. She had to see the private property no HOA access sign in high definition every single day. She had lost her presidency, she had lost her reputation, and because of the special assessment tax, she was now struggling to keep her house. One afternoon while I was power washing the test track, Linda walked up to the gate. She didn't have her clipboard, she didn't have her angry Karen face, she just looked tired. "Mark," she said through the iron bars, "the residents are talking. We're willing to offer you a monthly usage fee if you just let the guests park there on weekends. The neighborhood is dying without that space. People are moving out because there's nowhere for their friends to visit." I stopped the power washer and walked over, the water dripping off my boots onto the $80,000 asphalt. "Linda, do you remember 3 years ago, when I offered to sell this strip to the HOA for $20,000, you laughed. You told me you'd get it for free through the courts. Well, you were right about one thing, you got it for free. For me." I pointed to the ownership-proved document I had framed and mounted inside a glass case next to the gate. "This isn't a parking lot, Linda. It's a monument to your arrogance. If I let one person park here, your lawyers will call it public use again. So the answer is no. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." The who in this story had finally learned the ultimate lesson. The 58 cars that disappeared overnight weren't just vehicles. They were the HOA's leverage. And once that leverage was towed away, all that was left was the truth. As I hit the button on my remote, the heavy iron gate hissed shut with a mechanical finality. I walked back to my house, leaving the silent, empty, perfectly paved road behind me. It was the most expensive driveway in the county, paid for by the very people who tried to steal it. And every time I drove my truck over that smooth, black surface, I made sure to wave at Linda's window. Because in the end, she didn't just pave my road. She paved the way for the most satisfying revenge of my life. By the 6-month mark, the who of this story, the once proud residents of Oak Ridge Estates, had become a cautionary tale for the entire county. You see, when an HOA goes bankrupt and its leadership is caught in a web of illegal emergency spending, the value of every single home in that development doesn't just dip, it craters. The why was simple. Nobody wants to buy a house in a neighborhood where a $5,000 special assessment is hanging over their head like a guillotine. The how of the neighborhood's downfall was a slow-motion car crash. Without the $80,000 Linda had borrowed from the reserve fund, the community's infrastructure began to rot. The private security patrols stopped. The streetlights started flickering out one by one because the utility bill hadn't been paid. But the biggest blow was the parking ghost. Because my 300-foot strip was now a fortified private fortress, the 58 families who used to park there were forced back onto the narrow community streets. Fire trucks couldn't get through. Delivery vans were getting stuck. The city started issuing obstruction tickets daily. The free parking Linda had promised had turned into a financial prison. Then came the disappearing act of the residents themselves. Dave, the guy with the Ford Raptor, was the first to leave. He sold his house for $60,000 less than he bought it for, just to get away from the drama. Within 2 months, 10 more houses were on the market. Oak Ridge was becoming a ghost town of short sales and foreclosures. And then there was Linda. The who at the center of the storm finally hit rock bottom. The new court-appointed receiver for the HOA didn't just want her gone. They wanted the $80,000 back. They sued Linda personally for breach of fiduciary duty. They argued that she had acted with gross negligence by paving my land. I remember the morning the process server showed up at her door. I was standing at my gate checking the solar sensors on my security system. I saw the man hand her the papers. Linda didn't scream this time. She didn't reach for her clipboard. She just stood there on her porch looking at the smooth, black, beautiful asphalt of my driveway, the road she had built for me, and she started to cry. She had lost everything. Her neighbors had turned into her plaintiffs. Her legacy as the president was now a case study in law schools about how not to run an association. The final irony? The how of my daily life had become a luxury. I now had the best access road in the state. While the rest of the neighborhood dealt with cracked pavement and overgrown weeds on their communal streets, my private strip remained pristine. I used a small portion of the settlement money to hire a private maintenance crew to keep it swept and sealed. One evening, as I was closing the gate, I saw Linda loading a few suitcases into the back of a rental car. Her house had been foreclosed on. She was leaving. She stopped and looked at me across the iron bars one last time. "Was it worth it, Mark?" she asked, her voice cracking. "All this destruction just for a piece of land?" I looked at the property deed mounted on my gate, then back at her. "Linda, you're asking the wrong question. You should be asking, was it worth $80,000 of other people's money just to try and bully a man out of his own backyard?" She didn't answer. She got into the car and drove away, bouncing over the potholes of the neglected HOA street. As the sun set, the solar-powered lights, the ones the HOA had installed for me, flickered on, illuminating my private highway. The disappearing act was complete. The cars were gone, the HOA was gone, and now the Karen was gone too. All that was left was the land, the deed, and the silence of a battle won. By the 1-year anniversary of the midnight paving, the who in this story had shifted from a neighborhood in crisis to a neighborhood in total silence. The Oak Ridge Homeowners Association was officially dissolved. The how of the dissolution was a legal bloodbath. Creditors seized the community center. The pool was filled in with dirt because nobody could afford the liability insurance, and the streets were turned over to the county. But my 300-foot strip. It became the most famous piece of asphalt in the state. The why of my final move was about more than just spite. It was about legacy. I realized that as long as that road looked like a road, people would still try to use it. They would still see it as a missing link. So I decided to give it a final form that made it clear this was no longer a thoroughfare. It was a trophy. I used the last of the settlement money, the funds that Linda and her board had been forced to pay out for property damage, to hire a team of world-class landscape architects. I didn't want to just block the road. I wanted to reclaim it. "Perfect," I said, watching the mural come to life. "Now nobody can mistake this for a public street." The how was a masterclass in psychological warfare. I turned the first 50 feet of the road into a Zen garden. I had tons of white river rock poured over the edges of the asphalt, and I placed a series of massive 3-ton boulders in a zigzag pattern. You couldn't drive a car through there now if you wanted to. It was a permanent, physical no to anyone who thought they could ever park there again. But the why it worked so well was the Easter egg I left for the county surveyors. You see, when the HOA paved the road, they didn't just trespass on my land. They accidentally covered up the original 1920 property markers. Under the law, if you destroy a survey monument, you are liable for the cost of a full county resurvey. I waited until the new county board was seated, and then I dropped the bombshell. I demanded a certified reestablishment of boundaries. Because the HOA had lost the markers under $80,000 of asphalt, the county had to send a team out for 2 weeks to dig observation holes in my new road. Every time they drilled a hole into that pristine surface, it was like a needle pricking the heart of the remaining HOA loyalists. They had to watch as the very road they sacrificed their community for was turned into a Swiss cheese of legal investigation. And the best part? Each hole was capped with a brass permanent marker that officially labeled the land. Private property, absolute ownership. The when of the final victory came on a Tuesday morning. A new family was moving into Linda's old house. It had been bought by a young couple who didn't know the history. They pulled up in a moving truck and tried to use my driveway to back into their new garage. I didn't yell, I didn't get angry. I just walked down to my gate, hit the intercom, and spoke calmly. "Welcome to the neighborhood. Just so you know, that blacktop you're idling on is a private art installation and a legal sanctuary. You have 30 seconds to clear the private soil before the automated tow alert triggers. Have a great move-in day." They moved, faster than I've ever seen a moving truck move. The who had finally learned. The where was secured, and the why was etched in stone. I sat back on my porch, looking down at the $80,000 road that was now a private garden, a basketball court, and a legal fortress. I realized that Linda hadn't just given me a road. She had given me a story that would be told every time a new resident asked, "What happened to the parking lot?" And the answer would always be the same. A Karen tried to steal the land, so the land stole the Karen. By the time the second anniversary of the midnight paving rolled around, the who in this story had become a legend. In the legal circles of our county, they don't call it the Oak Ridge dispute anymore. They call it the pavement trap. The how of the grand finale wasn't a court order or a tow truck. It was the final, crushing weight of the truth. You see, when you try to use someone else's property to solve your own problems, you don't just lose the land. You lose your right to complain when the owner decides to keep the improvements. The why of this final chapter is the most satisfying part of all. Linda had spent $80,000 of the community's money to build me a bridge to her neighborhood. She thought she was building a way in, but I turned it into a permanent way out. I stood at the gate one last time, watching a county maintenance truck drive past on the public road. The driver slowed down, looked at my fortified, landscaped, and perfectly paved driveway and gave me a thumbs up. He knew the story. Everyone knew the story. It had become a local landmark, the road that disappeared 58 cars in a single night. "Ownership proved," I whispered to the empty air. The when of the final closure happened on a quiet Sunday morning. I decided to host a celebration of sovereignty. I didn't invite the neighbors. I didn't invite the new HOA board, which was really just a 3-person bankruptcy committee. I invited the towing crew, Big John, and the legal team that had helped me dismantle Linda's empire. We set up a massive barbecue grill right in the middle of the guest parking zone. We ate steaks on the very spot where the HOA president used to stand with her clipboard. We played music through a high-end sound system that was powered by the solar panels the HOA had installed on my fence. It was the ultimate victory lap. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the blacktop, I realized the true what of this entire experience. It wasn't about the money. I had won over $100,000 in settlements, but I would have done it all for a penny. It was about the principle of the property line. In a world where people think they can vote away your rights or bully you into compliance because it's for the greater good, sometimes you have to be the one who stands your ground. You have to be the one who says, "My land starts here and your ego ends there." The how of the ending was a simple act of silence. I stopped talking to the neighbors. I stopped answering the door for community outreach. I became the ghost of the neighborhood, the man who lived behind the black gate. And because of that, my property value tripled. People started paying a premium for the houses next to mine because they knew that as long as I was there, no HOA would ever dare to cross the line again. I had become the buffer zone that kept the neighborhood safe from its own greed. Linda was long gone, living in a small apartment 3 towns over, still fighting the lawsuits from her former friends. The 58 cars had been reclaimed from the impound lot months ago, but the owners never looked at me when they drove past. They looked at the ground. They looked at the asphalt. They looked at the $80,000 mistake that they were still paying for in their monthly special assessment taxes. So the next time someone tells you that it's just a little bit of land or it's for the community, remember the 58 cars, remember the black asphalt, and most importantly, remember to check your deed. If you think the HOA got exactly what they deserved, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment below with ownership proved, and let me know, would you have towed all 58 cars too?